All right. Everybody hear me? Okay, I just want to cover one thing. We've got about 4 videos to show, and I wanted to talk a little bit. Basically, when it comes down to it, in my opinion, this is my opinion, but it's really not about science. It's about Jesus Christ and about what he said. That's what it's about. It's the word. What did he say? And I've read many scriptures, and it sure looks like to me he supported the Old Testament as the Word of God. It was the Word of God. It was inspired Word of God. We hear that from Paul. We hear that from Peter, and John. He was the Word. And so I've had there's been a guy coming every week. I don't know if you all know it or not. He's not here right now. But he can't stand it that I teach young earth creation. And he is a PhD in geology. And, and I'm thinking it's about the scripture, man. It's not really about science. And any kind of science that's long, long ago and far, far away cannot be tested. You cannot test what happened in the past. You can't observe it. You can't repeat it. You can't falsify it. So that kind of science is, it's not like there's 2 kinds of science. There's origin science and there's operational or observable science. Observable science is one thing. Operational science is something else, okay? And they're starting with the assumption there's no God. There's science. The mainstream science is stuck in that naturalism where they begin everything. They say, this is what they say. Again, not all the scientists or evolutionists or atheists or anything like that, but the mainstream scientists' rules, their philosophy is naturalism. And you're not going to be able to go into a scientific journal, and when we have all the math, so we could go in there right now and we could show them mathematically there has to be a creator, but they wouldn't accept it because we're inferring there's a God, and you can't do that. So anyway, what I did was I've searched this out. I've searched this out for years, and I have a bunch of scriptures here. There's 25 scriptures on the front and back, and basically what it says is foundation of the world. So there's a bunch of scriptures that talk about when was the foundation of the world, okay? And the world began, so when was the world began? And then the beginning of creation, okay? And so I've got some copies back here. There's that chair back there. So if you're interested, you can pick one up as you leave, and you might go through this and you might learn something. Probably some of you have already know all this, but maybe you don't. And this would be something you could refer to as well. I think it would be really good. Okay, we've got 4 videos to show today, and the first one is really good, so we're going to go ahead and start that. Cynthia, you ready to go? All right.
Hans Christian Andersen's classic tale, The Emperor's New Clothes, is often a child's first foray into the realm of philosophy, as it raises questions regarding conformity, self-questioning, and obedience to authority. Its central theme is the idea that the emperor's wardrobe is real, is based in large part on the self-deception, self-doubt, and fear of reprisal from one's own peers for the charade to even be possible. The tale's synopsis can be summarized as that of 2 scammers appeal to the narcissistic tendencies of a local ruler, in declaring that they can weave him a suit that will be invisible only to the intellectually deficient, i.e. the stupid, among the local citizenry. And not wanting to be the only one seemingly too dull to see what isn't there, the entire population pretends to behold his fine new raiment. That is, until a child among them declares what's abundantly apparent: the emperor has no clothes. In a similar way, for over 100 years now, naturalists have been pointing to the abundant evidence of evolution to the West's population in declaring that it's obviously visible to those who aren't so blinded by their doltish and foolhardy commitment to religious beliefs. I mean, how can you not believe in evolution when natural selection can be observed? And so aggressively has this notion been put forth in an effort to avoid the embarrassment of seemingly intellectually deficient. Even many in the church have obediently smiled and nodded obeisance to this cloak of invisibility donned long ago by the story of evolution. But does natural selection equal evolution? You see, because natural selection is so equated with the story of evolution, and biblical creationists, of course, don't hold to the evolutionary story, many people are often surprised when they find out we actually believe in natural selection, perhaps thinking we do see the emperor's shiny get-up. That's because many people think natural selection is basically equivalent to molecules to man evolution, and is still one of the biggest proofs for evolution offered in school classrooms and popular media. And this is likely due to the fact that natural selection can be scientifically demonstrated, leading many to believe evolution itself has been confirmed, and therefore repeatedly fully validated scientifically. Now, the namesake of the most popular version of evolution today, Charles Darwin, claimed observable evidence of evolution in the form of natural selection because of the variation he saw within certain kinds of animals, particularly the various finches he observed in the Galapagos Islands. He saw many differences, such as the variation in beak size. Today, the ability for these small observable variations to occur in real time within a species is now often called microevolution by many. And this is where it starts to get a little tricky for the average person, who often hears and understands conceptually that the generic meaning of evolution is change in living things over time. You see, every biologist on the planet, whether creationist or evolutionist, believes creatures can change over time. So simply stating something has changed can't mean some kind of fish-to-philosopher definition of evolution if both camps, almost diametrically opposed in their beliefs, affirm creatures can change. It's actually the type of change that both groups disagree on, and which kind observational science supports. You see, as Darwin observed variations in various kinds of animals, he then extrapolated the observable variation he saw by claiming that perhaps given enough time, they could eventually become fundamentally new kinds of animals. But in order for that to have happened, one kind of creature, let's say a lizard-like animal, would have somehow needed to acquire brand new, never-before-existing genetic information for different forms, functions, and features like feathers, wings, or a different type of lung system, for instance, to turn it into a different kind, like a bird, for example. But the problem was that Darwin knew almost nothing of what we now know regarding modern genetics, and simply assumed that there was virtually no limit to the potential variation among the individuals of a species. Though truthfully, any animal breeder of his day could have told him otherwise, because people have been performing experimental breeding for thousands of years now. Darwin's far-fetched beliefs in strange ideas like the possibility of a race of bears fishing in the water, perhaps slowly developing shorter legs, longer tails, then wider mouths until they eventually evolved into whales, is the concept often called macroevolution today. And it makes for a good story. But like all fiction, it's completely unobservable outside of man-made depictions in textbooks and videos that are used to convince people of something no one has ever seen. Ironically, Darwin often used variation in kinds brought about by animal breeding as analogous to what natural selection might accomplish. He further reasoned that if pigeons and dogs can be selectively bred by man to produce certain desired traits, then nature itself might select for limitless traits that promote survival itself through natural selection. However, while breeders use intelligence to select for desired traits such as size, strength, or physical appearance, the limits of what can be selected for are determined by the genetic variability already in existence within the creature, contrary to what Darwin imagined. Selection is a process dependent on what is available to be selected from, which is not limitless. The bottom line is you can't select what's not there. Detailed genetic analysis and knowledge of how DNA functions became a study many years after Darwin and revealed that all of the genes from a species compose a gene pool from which selection can occur in populations. The key to remember is that selection is limited to the genes in the gene pool of that particular kind. Genes that aren't in the gene pool of a kind can't be selected for. Take, for example, the tremendous diversity in domestic dogs, which includes over 150 varieties. Yet, even with all of this variation, from the Saint Bernard to the Chihuahua, the Pekingese to the Poodle, the Pomeranian, and the Great Pyrenees, there are limits to what dog breeders can achieve. They can select from traits already within the gene pool, such as height, leg length, fur color, and ear size, but they can't select for what isn't there. No matter how hard they try, they will never breed a flying dog with wings, feathers, and flight navigation systems through selection, because there are no genes within the gene pool to produce wings or any of the other numerous specializations necessary for flight to select from. Think of selection like going to a buffet lunch with friends. Each of you can select different things and result in different combinations. But your selection won't cause brand new, never before seen foods to appear on the table that weren't there before. Sometimes when I'm trying to communicate the big picture as to why natural selection isn't evolution, I like to use a simple explanation using a few decks of cards to illustrate. And although, like all analogies, it isn't completely accurate in every detail, it can still be effective in demonstrating some basic concepts. Firstly, to better understand the analogy, we need to recognize that sexually reproducing creatures, like dogs for example, only get their genetic information from their parents. Half of their DNA from mom and half from dad. So let's then use decks of playing cards being compared to the genetic information in a specific kind of creature, dogs for example, to help us understand how changes in living things can happen without them evolving. If we start with 2 decks, shuffling each and dealing half of the cards from one deck and half from the other deck into a new deck, we would see the new deck we created would be different from what the first ones were originally. And if you keep doing this, the decks will change every time you deal them. Some decks will look more similar to others, and some will be very unique. But because there's a limited amount of cards to start with, they can only vary so much. It's like the dog kind. You can get Chihuahuas, Beagles, Poodles, or Great Danes, but they're all still dogs. And the big takeaway is this: no matter how long you deal these cards, shuffling and dealing cards won't create new cards with brand new symbols that never existed before. You might get decks with more red than black cards, specific combinations of big and little cards. You might get crumpled, damaged, or worn out cards, but it will only produce combinations of the various symbols you already had from the decks when you started. And they will never produce new cards with new symbols that never existed before. Dogs never have offspring with wings, for example. As a matter of fact, if you were able to keep doing this, eventually you might lose some cards, and some decks may not even contain certain cards anymore. Some decks might not have any 2s in them, or some might not have any queens, for example. And this is what natural selection does. It simply selects from what's already available. It doesn't add new, never-before-seen cards, so to speak. As Professor Walter Veith, former holder of the chair of zoology at the University of Western Cape, said when discussing natural selection, the very name selection implies that you're choosing between 2 or more variants. Natural selection never increases the number of variants, it only decreases them. So, how does a mechanism that makes less and less end up making more and more? In the same way, if a various group of dogs, some with long, some with medium or short hair, migrated into an area that had a very cold climate, for example, obviously the long-haired dogs would likely survive better as they would be able to keep warmer than their shorter-haired counterparts. So, because this environment favors that specific genetic combination, those dogs will reproduce more effectively, i.e. their genetic deck is advantageous in this game of life under this environmental rule set. And any new dogs in that environment that do not have those favorable traits will get eliminated more frequently, leaving behind the long-haired group. In this case, the rules are set up to select for the long-haired dogs to win and the short-haired dogs to lose. But remember, if we changed the environment, i.e. the rules, and had dropped the original group of dogs into a very warm environment, the climate would have selected for the dogs with more of the short-haired gene combinations. So natural selection isn't a truly creative process. It only selects from what God made in the first place in each kind. To create truly new traits, mutations in the DNA would have had to happen that could somehow create, add, and integrate a huge amount of incredibly sophisticated information into the gene pool, something that's never been observed. Genetic mutation may sound creative when used in pop culture references where superheroes gain fantastic abilities, but in actuality, they are genetic copying mistakes caused by various factors that occur when DNA produces copies of itself. And neo-Darwinism basically says that mutations provide variety, while natural selection sorts out the best of this new genetic information in order to evolve creatures. But far from producing useful and novel genetic information, mutations tend to break things. They degrade the existing genetic code already in place. And while you can achieve different looks, such as normally red flowers being made pink when mutations delete some of the red pigment, for example, this is not actually the creation of a novel genetic feature from nothing. It's brought about by subtraction, not addition. So when evolutionists invoke mutations as a key evolutionary mechanism, it's like saying that scrambling the information in a computer program could perhaps result in better software being written by random processes. But in reality, corruption of DNA coding is a recipe for chaos. And the worse the corruption, the greater the problems. This is why we see so many serious diseases today as the direct result of genetic mutation. These aren't the kinds of changes required for pond scum to people evolution to have occurred. So watch out for the equivocation and obfuscation that's often used when discussing the story of evolution. Evolutionists like to refer to the sort of variation we see among individual kinds of animals as microevolution, implying that this is somehow related to the chance formation of fundamentally new animals by the supposedly existing but never observed process known as macroevolution. However, there is no demonstrable experiment relating so-called microevolution and macroevolution, which makes these terms highly misleading. So be brave enough not to fold under the pressure of those around you that say evolution is a fact and it's been observed. Be honest. Has anyone ever seen something even close to what would be properly termed evolution in this world? No. The emperor has no clothes. The Bible, on the other hand, makes perfect sense of what we observe in nature. In Genesis 1, God tells us that He created all animals to reproduce according to their kinds. He created and gave each kind a different gene pool from which came all of the wonderful variation that we see today within each of the various kinds, but all without one kind ever changing into another. Hans Christian.
You know, when I think of God, of course, I think of who loves us unconditionally and created all this to give to man, to bless man. But when you think about the first chapter of Genesis, He likes variation. He doesn't like things to look the same. He likes lots and lots and lots of variation. And that's what He put in creation, is the ability to, if you had a man and a woman, a husband and wife, they have the potential to produce, I think the number is I think it's at least a number followed by 2,000 zeros. In other words, they could have children until they had millions and billions of children, and they still hadn't had two of them that are exactly alike. That's how much potential we have and variation we have in living things to do. Just to give a little lesson on genetics, and I'm not an authority on genetics, but I think it's so cool the way God set it up. But what we have is what we call essential genes, okay, and non-essential genes, okay? There's genes in every single one of us that are almost identical. We have like our lungs and our heart and the things that we have to have that we can't live without, okay? We can live without an arm, but we can't live without a heart. We can't live without lungs. We can't live without kidneys. We can't live without a liver. So there's so many genes in there, but and just a small amount of genes produces much variation within the kind. Okay, like I said before, if you took the average black person and the average white person, which when the average person would look at them and say, "Oh, there's so much difference between those two kinds of people," and you took the average, basically the average difference again is about 0.012% between the average black, and that's like, okay, there's really no difference in us. We're just one people. They're just variants of one race. But anyway. Yeah, genetics is really awesome, and God set it up that way, but it's cool. All right, you want to start the next one, Cynthia?
Evolution holds that dinosaurs evolved 220 million years ago and died about 65 million years ago from any of a number of possible extinction events. But the Bible teaches that all land animals, including dinosaurs, were created on the sixth day of creation, just thousands of years ago, and they were all named by Adam just before God handed over his completed creation to Adam and Eve, charging them to take dominion over his completed creation. Then, about 4,400 years ago, the entire world was deluged by Noah's flood, and the dinosaurs, along with billions of other creatures, were wiped out. Let's take a quick look at some evidences that show that the biblical account might actually be true. First, dinosaurs are cleverly designed. Consider this Triceratops. Its 2,000-pound head is mounted in a way that allows it to turn every which way, yet still be strong enough to ram something, even while running. What about massive sauropods with weight-bearing systems from hip to toe that allow its 200,000-pound body to even walk, and neck vertebrae that are 90% filled with air so it can lift up its head? Next, there's the absence of dinosaur ancestors and transitions. Even the Chicago Field Museum sign admits there have been 0 transitions between dinosaur kinds. It shows question marks regarding where they came from. It's almost like someone just put each basic kind on Earth right at the same time. There are even dinosaur design features that show they lived in the ideal pre-flood world. Sauropods can exceed 200,000 pounds, yet they have tiny nostrils for breathing. Pterodactyls may have been too heavy to fly in today's atmosphere. Same with huge pre-flood dragonflies. The fossil record is filled with giant creatures and plants. We know this because there are billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the earth. And when we look at the dinosaur fossil record, we see that they were buried furiously, rapidly, and simultaneously, oftentimes found fleeing in groups. Take this massive bone bed in Hilda, Canada. Thousands of centrosaurs were catastrophically buried over an entire square mile. Or this one in China, where thousands of different kinds of dinosaurs were simultaneously buried in a single 980-foot-long ravine. There are hundreds of dinosaur bone beds all over the world, including the US, where the Morrison Formation covers 13 states and 700,000 square miles. Thousands of torn-apart dinosaurs are buried here in hundreds of mass graves, with many found in the classic death pose with their necks arched back, choking as they died. Museum signs everywhere even admit they died in a watery catastrophe. Some dinosaurs are even found mummified, with tree leaves, flowers, ferns, shrubs, and algae still in their stomach. Dinosaurs are even found buried with marine creatures. Isn't a global flood the best explanation for this? Scientists have been discovering soft tissue in dinosaur bones. Just in the last 20 years, over 50 articles have been published in scientific journals that have documented 14 bioorganic materials in dinosaur bones that simply cannot be millions of years old. These include blood vessels, red blood cells, hemoglobin, bone cells, ovalbumin, chitin. Many dinosaur bones are even found unfossilized in places like Madagascar, Alaska, and Montana. Collagen, which has a maximum shelf life of about 900,000 years at 40 degrees. With a maximum shelf life of less than 1 million years, what's collagen doing in dinosaur bones that are supposedly 65 million years old? Limited DNA, skin pigments, FEX proteins, histones, keratin, and elastin. Just 20 years ago, most scientists simply assumed dinosaur bones were solid mineralized impressions of bones. But modern science has now revealed that many of the dinosaur bones are original, even at the molecular level. The fact that over a dozen states in the US are filled with dinosaur fossils buried under heaps of mud also attests to the flood. In fact, geologists have found what was a temporarily exposed dinosaur peninsula where the dinosaurs made their last stand, now buried there along with lake and sea life transported by the massive waves. Deposits thousands of feet thick occur east and west of this temporarily exposed peninsula that extended from Minnesota to New Mexico. Now buried across it are pre-flood wetland plants and animals, including dinosaurs, turtles, frogs, fish, and many birds. Thousands of dinosaur trackways up and down this peninsula, Plus, similar temporarily exposed low areas on other continents suggest that dying dinosaurs and other hardy track makers floated, waded, and walked on freshly deposited mud trying to find safe ground. When coming up over the Dinosaur Peninsula, the Zuni megasequence catastrophically buries dinosaurs in the Morrison Formation, a 13-state area encompassing over 700,000 square miles. This Jurassic unit includes at least 141 massive dinosaur boneyards, where dinosaurs like Camarasaurus, Diplodocus, Apatosaurus, Stegosaurus, and Allosaurus are found. The Cretaceous layers, like the Hell Creek Formation, are found on top of the Jurassic, holding hundreds of mass boneyards containing several different types of dinosaurs, such as T-Rex, Triceratops, Centrosaurus, and Edmontosaurus that had been living in a different ecosystem, also buried by the Zuni. The Zuni was so massive and fast that it engulfed entire regions with mud flows, burying giant creatures like this T-Rex under 50 feet of muddy sediment, entombed so quickly that preserved blood cells, blood vessels, and bone cells were found just recently. How much water does it take to pile 50 feet of mud on top of a dinosaur? The Dinosaur National Monument in Utah contains thousands of visible bones from 11 kinds of dinosaurs that were buried in a jumbled mass in the Morrison Formation, together with crocodiles, turtles, lizards, frogs, and clams. What type of event would it take to bury all these different land animals with millions of clams? When the Dinosaur Peninsula flooded over completely, large herds of dinosaurs were entombed in massive fossil graveyards in the Upper Cretaceous system found in northern Wyoming, Montana, and Alberta, Canada. The dinosaurs had tried to escape by fleeing northward up the peninsula as waters advanced from the south. This explains this massive graveyard in northern Montana that's over 1.2 miles long and contains 30 million fossil fragments representing over 10,000 adult Maiasaura that were simultaneously buried. In this entire collection of bones, not a single baby was found. Every one of these 10,000 Maiasaura was between 9 and 23 feet long. Does this seem like the adult dinosaurs were stampeding away from the raging floodwaters with 100% of their young falling behind and being engulfed in a different part of the peninsula? Just 170 miles northeast of this location is one of the largest dinosaur graveyards in the world, one that even secular scientists admit was caused by a watery catastrophe. Here, thousands of centrosaurs are buried in 14 mega bone beds over an entire square mile, which is nearly 500 football fields. Looks like a massive herd of these creatures, thousands of them, were simultaneously buried in mud by Noah's flood. Just 45 miles west from this location is yet another massive flood deposit, and this one even has 49 different species of dinosaurs buried along with turtles, crocodiles, fish, flying reptiles, birds, and small mammals. What type of disaster could bury 49 species of dinosaurs and many other types of animals, including marine life, together in massive graves? These mass burial sites are common in the US as well. For example, look at this dinosaur dig site in Wyoming, where a 1-meter thick layer of mudstone stretches for 80 acres, with over 1 million bones buried in a graded, sorted bed, where big bones are found at the bottom and little bones on top. The only way to develop a graded bed like this is by a catastrophic process that transports these bones and deposits them during a single event. Large flying creatures like pterosaurs were able to fly to escape the rising floodwaters, delaying their demise until the later stages of the flood. The fossil record shows they are buried in many different layers all over the world. Does this evidence seem to support the Bible's recent and violent flood, or evolution stories? Kind of makes you think, doesn't it?
Okay, Cynthia. So, what do you think happened during the flood? Man, it was, no creation scientist has it all figured out, and I haven't really done the actual research, but I do make a lot of observations wherever I go on a trip and stuff, because there's mountains all over America, and then we went to Alaska, and we've been up through Montana and close to the Grand Canyon, I kind of explain it like one way, a quick way, is say when the flood came, basically it turned the world inside out and upside down. It was a catastrophic event, unbelievable. So what all was going on? And you can imagine, these dinosaur graveyards that we see all over the United States in the Morrison Formation. How could that happen? These bodies are mangled up. The bones are all mangled up. You have marine organisms. You have plants. You have fish. You have mammals. All this stuff just buried. I mean, scientists keep telling us, they want us to believe that how these layers formed was you had an ocean and it came up and it laid down the sediments, and this took millions of years, and then the ocean receded, and then the next one came up. Fossils aren't formed that way. Fossils, you have to cover things up really, really fast in order to form a fossil. They have fossils where basically, I think it's called an ichthyosaur, is actually giving birth. It's fossilized giving birth. Now, do you don't think that didn't happen fast? You know, we have other fossils where one fish is eating another fish, and its fish is not even in its mouth completely, and it's catastrophically covered up so fast that it just died. I mean, just buried just like that. And that's what it takes to make fossils. So, you know, the geologists are told this because they have to have millions and millions and millions of years, and nobody's going to believe the theory of evolution. But they got major problems, and they know it, but they're still holding on, and they can't. It's almost like they just can't give up, and they can't dare say they missed it, and they can't say that there's something wrong with their theory. All right, Cynthia. Oh. Wait a minute.
Dinosaurs in the Bible.
Wait a minute, Cynthia. Let me get over here so I can hear you. I didn't.
Okay. What about the dinosaurs that Noah took on the ark?
Right.
Okay. Because I have seen pictures of a structure in Cambodia that has dinosaurs.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. They're actually going to show on the next one of the videos. I don't know if it's the next one or not. They're absolutely right. You know, we think of dinosaurs as all of them being used. The average dinosaur is probably only 3 or 4 feet tall. Okay, and they could have taken Noah could have probably had a bunch of juvenile dinosaurs on the ark, not full-grown ones and juveniles, so he could take care of. Another thing we have to realize, and this is what really offends a lot of people, I think it does, I don't know, but the world we're living in today is nothing compared to the world before the fall and the world before the flood. We don't have any idea. You know, you can walk around and you can look at things and you look, oh, this is God's beautiful earth. I'm sorry, it's not. This is not the way he designed it. This, what you see death. Have you ever walked up to a tree lately and looked at every leaf on the tree and said, every one of them is really nice? I doubt seriously if you've ever looked at a tree and there's not tons of leaves on that tree, even if it's not already decaying and already dying. I mean, this is not the way, and it's going to be good, because one day there's going to be a new heaven, a new earth, and it's going to be awesome. But it's not going to be anything like this one. I mean, because this one was totally turned inside out and upside down. And then after the flood, we have to realize that the earth was very different. Very different. The atmosphere was very different. Remember, before the flood, men was living to be 900 years. After the flood, God reduced the ages down quite a bit to 120 years. And then, you know, if you look, you can actually see how men was living less and less and less and less. And we got to Abraham, he lived 175 years, and Isaac lived to be 180 years, and Jacob lived to be 143 years, and Joseph lived to be 110 years, and Joshua, and it's just done that. I mean, that's the world we live in. It's not anything like the very good creation that he created. So, but one of these days, it's going to be a new heaven, a new earth, and that's what we look forward to. That's where our eyes should be at, and that's the hope that the Bible says, he who has this hope in him purifies himself even as he is pure. David?
So Job lists out 2 different dinosaurs that are mentioned, and so you have an incredible description about its rib cage and standing in a river against a river flowing. It's a perfect description of like a brontosaurus and stuff like that, of course. And we have fossils that have come out of Glen Rose, Texas, for example, where you have a dinosaur footprint in soft mud and a human footprint in the same footprint. So you have the dinosaur footprint, and in the same soft mud you have a human footprint. They're trying to say that those are hundreds of millions of years apart. I don't think so.
Yeah,
So,
that's
there's
good.
so much evidence.
This is what I heard. I've been where he's talking to, and I've seen that. And the creationist tries to get the evolutionists to come out there and look at this stuff. So it's come out. So this is the story of one of them. The guy come within about, maybe 50 yards of it. He looked at it. He said, yeah, I see it. And he left. didn't want to look at it. They don't want to see it. They can't. They can't afford it. Their whole life is revolved around that. And they're just stuck. They can't. It's pretty sad, but it's kind of like being in a political party that you can't say anything against, your party, or if you're president, if your party is, the president's in your party, you can't criticize, you can't. I mean, it's pretty sad, but it's kind of the way the world is. But all right, Cynthia.
Dinosaurs in the Bible. What in the world do those two ideas have to do with each other? Well, the Bible presents a very straightforward story of creation. God created the universe in 6 days. He made the swimming and flying animals on the 5th day of creation, and He made all land-living animals and humans on day 6. If that's true, then God created dinosaurs and humans on the very same day, since dinosaurs were land-living creatures. Most books and movies and articles that write about or teach things about dinosaurs hardly ever teach that dinosaurs and humans live together. In fact, they teach that dinosaurs and humans were separated by millions of years. In fact, they teach that dinosaurs died out about 65 million years ago and that humans evolved in some shape, form, or fashion about 1 million years ago. And so most of the teaching on dinosaurs says that humans and dinosaurs were separated by over 60 million years. Did God create dinosaurs and humans together on the 6th day of creation, or did they evolve millions of years apart? When we look at all the evidence, we find that humans and dinosaurs were indeed together on the earth, just as the Bible says. First, there are numerous places in which humans of the past left depictions of dinosaurs. On the Kachina Natural Bridge in Blanding, Utah, there's a wall carving that the Anasazi Indians put there that one evolutionist stated bears a startling resemblance to a dinosaur. Why would that be something that would startle someone who is an evolutionist? Well, because you're finding something that you didn't expect to find. It's startling, almost gives you a start, a carving of a dinosaur that Indians put there and showing that Indians could have seen those reptiles. In addition, there's a fossil of a dinosaur that resembles the carving of an Apatosaurus that was found only 45 miles away from the Kachina Natural Bridge. In a temple in Cambodia, we know it was constructed in 1187 AD, and researchers found a carving that resembles a dinosaur there. In fact, one expert in Cambodian art stated that the carving is, and I quote, a very convincing representation of a Stegosaurus. In Peru, ancient Indian burial stones have been found that have animals carved on them that match our understanding of dinosaurs. Interestingly, these stones, they were found beginning in the 1930s, yet they had plant-eating dinosaurs depicted on them that had spikes on their backs. What's unusual about this is that we didn't know that those long-necked, long-tailed plant-eating dinosaurs had spikes on their back until we found fossilized skin in 1991. In addition, in Acambaro, Mexico, there have been hundreds of clay figurines that were unearthed in the 1940s that depicted dinosaurs in various different positions and actions. You add to this the fact that recent dinosaur fossils have been found that aren't complete fossils, they're actually bones that have some soft tissue in them. The bone has been mineralized, but the soft tissue has not. Partial red blood cells and collagen are still present in numerous dinosaur fossils. If these fossils were millions of years old, the fragile soft tissues, they would have long decayed and been mineralized, but they weren't. Furthermore, the Bible is the most historically accurate record available to humans. It says very plainly that God created everything in 6 days. And that would mean that dinosaurs and humans were created on the very same day. And the Bible also mentions an animal called a behemoth. And the text states that God made along with humans. It says that behemoth eats grass like an ox. See, now his strength is in his hips and his power is in his stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar. His bones are like beams of bronze. You read that in the book of Job, chapter 40, verses 15 and following. Some people have suggested that, well, this has got to be an elephant or a hippopotamus. It doesn't make any sense. Elephants and hippopotamuses, they don't have huge tails that swing like a cedar. What would? A huge plant-eating dinosaur matches the description perfectly. So where did dinosaurs go? And the fact of the matter is many animals have gone extinct in the past. That's nothing new. But the idea of an asteroid hitting the Yucatan Peninsula and causing catastrophic fires and volcanoes, killing the dinosaurs and them dying out 65 million years ago, it's got some problems. Crocodiles supposedly were alive then, and crocodiles are still with us. Sharks, turtles. Why those animals still living and not dinosaurs? You see, a better explanation for where dinosaurs went is available. Every time we find a huge dinosaur graveyard, they exist all over the world. What caused those huge graveyards? In virtually every single instance, it was a flood. What flood would have had the power to kill thousands of dinosaurs and bury them in huge mass graveyards all over the world? The global flood of Noah? It provides a perfect answer. But if you're thinking through it, if the flood killed most of the dinosaurs, what about the ancient human artwork? Hey, didn't some people after the flood see them and carve them and depict them on cave walls or burial stones? That means some of the dinosaurs must have been on the ark. But how are you going to get these huge creatures on Noah's ark? Well, the answer is much simpler than most people think. The largest dinosaur egg that we've ever found is about 24 inches long. Noah simply could have taken freshly hatched dinosaurs on the ark. That would have taken care of lots of the problems of the room that you would have needed to house them and the food that you would have needed to feed them. You know, when we get to look at all the evidence, we realize that when we really know about dinosaurs and all of the facts, those fit perfectly with the story of creation found in the Bible. On day 6, God created humans and all land animals, including dinosaurs.
Okay, Cynthia, go ahead and play the next one.
I don't know why it says that. There's nothing I've seen.
From its inception, the scientific proofs offered to support human evolution have been riddled with holes. In fact, just like the dubious sideshow examples touted by circus shysters, many of the earliest proofs were fraudulent, and modern research shows that many proofs were driven by scientific ignorance and evolutionary interpretations rather than solid evidence. However, the Bible is clear that many people attempt to deny the God of Scripture because of their unrighteousness, as a way to avoid personal judgment for their sin. In essence, many are willing to believe a lie rather than the truth if it suits their purpose. They become compliant with error and are willing to be deceived. Perhaps it's like the saying often attributed to P.T. Barnum says, "There's a sucker born every minute." Take Neanderthals, for example. In 1856, workmen digging in a cave in the Neander Valley near Dusseldorf in Germany discovered a fossilized skull cap, 2 femurs, and bone fragments. Examined by one Professor Schaffhausen, a professional anatomist, he concluded that they were fully human. However, 4 years later, after the release of Darwin's On the Origin of Species, the search for fossils of imagined ape-like ancestors of man increased with much vigor amongst naturalists. And lo and behold, Irish geologist William King decided to re-examine the fossil skull of Neanderthal man and see what he thought. His conclusion? Like other Darwinians of the day, he argued, against the professional opinion of an expert anatomist, that Neanderthal man was an ape-like creature, And so positive was he that he actually declared, "The thoughts and desires which once dwelt within it never soared beyond those of the brute." Such clairvoyant ability as to somehow perceive the fossilized thoughts emanating from a collection of bones demonstrates his obvious evolutionary bias. And this wild speculation wasn't simply against the opinion of one lone expert from across the aisle of human origin ideology. It flew in the face of no other than the great anatomist Rudolf Virchow, one of the most prominent physicians of the 19th century, who also argued that Neanderthals were fully human in every respect, with any abnormalities being the result of their suffering from rickets or arthritis. However, depictions of Neanderthals as stooped-over ape men began to proliferate evolutionary literature, and such representations were mimicked in the circuses and carnival freak shows of the day. The evolutionary mindset took hold of all sectors of society, becoming the evolutionary memes of their day. For example, in 1929, life-sized statues of bestial Neanderthals greeted visitors viewing Chicago's Field Museum of Natural History and were only replaced relatively recently. After an overwhelming amount of evidence collected over the years proved that Neanderthals were simply powerfully built people, well within the modern range of human anatomy, they were replaced with more modern depictions, which today look like normal humans. A current Chicago Field Museum article states, "The first of 2 Neanderthal family dioramas were installed in 1929. In the early 1970s, the Neanderthal figures were replaced with new ones. By 1994, the Hall of the Stone Age of the Old World exhibit had been dismantled because most were considered to be scientifically inaccurate. The hall had included the Neanderthal family." So, despite their still being used as examples of our supposed primitive ancestors in popular movies and catchy commercials such as the "simple enough for a caveman to do it" series today, Neanderthals were never subhuman. That idea was always a false imposition applied upon the facts rather than derived directly from them. And perhaps the most definitive confirmation of this comes from no less than Dr. Eric Trinkhaus, a paleoanthropologist specializing in Neanderthals, early modern human biology, and human evolution. He's considered one of the world's foremost authorities on Neanderthal man, and he has concluded, "Detailed comparisons of Neanderthal skeletal remains with those of modern humans have shown that there's nothing in Neanderthal anatomy that conclusively indicates locomotor, manipulative, intellectual, or linguistic abilities inferior to those of modern humans." So, evolutionists used Neanderthals for approximately 175 years to lace the minds of millions with evolutionary ideas of proto-human derivatives, only to later affirm their full humanity. But what about other examples that have been offered to the public? The most famous hoax, and one that is much bemoaned among the evolutionary community, is the famous Piltdown Man. The supposed ape-man skull and jawbone was found in 1912 by a laborer digging in a gravel pit near the town of Piltdown in England. It was announced that both pieces came from the same ancient ape man and dubbed Piltdown Man. For 40 years, this supposed proof of human evolution was displayed in museum exhibits and textbooks as proof positive that human beings had descended from ape-like ancestors, with hand-drawn, supposed scientific images of what the creature must have looked like, all with amazing similarity to how the freak show missing links were portrayed, described, and depicted by their promotional artists as well. Only after 4 decades was the evidence re-examined and revealed as a fraud. And it wasn't even a good fraud, as one could easily see how the teeth from the jawbone had been filed down to make them look more human, and the bones had been chemically treated to make them look very old. It was simply a combination of an old human skull and a modern ape jawbone stuck together. We raise this example today not simply to rub it in that one evidence for evolution has been disproven, but to point out that the acceptance and promotion of such evidence by professionals for over 40 years can only be attributed to one of 2 things. pathetic scientific acumen displayed by the evolutionary scientists of the day, or an agenda that made people willing to overlook the obvious fraud to accomplish its ideologic goals? For hundreds of people involved in producing museum-grade copies of the exhibit, distributing them to various museums around the world, and producing numerous textbook diagrams and descriptions based on the evidence, all not to detect the fraud, seems highly suspicious or perhaps negligent at best. Now, just 5 years later, a Nebraskan rancher found what he thought was a special kind of tooth on his farm. And an evolutionist paleontologist friend of his was excited at the prospect that it might be from an ape man. Once again, an artist with a healthy helping of evolutionary imagination produced a portrait of Nebraska Man, a hairy ape man, along with his ape woman wife, complete with an ape woman bob cut, apparently to make her appear feminine but not too feminine. Several years later, scientists confirmed that the tooth had come from a type of pig. The whole fiasco had nothing to do with apes or people. It had everything to do with evolutionary presuppositions that drove false conclusions, all based on laughably flimsy evidence. Much as how the carnivals cycled through the unfortunate ape-men performers of the past, a whole slew of proposed human ancestors have come and gone over the years as a carousel of caveman candidates have been proposed, debunked, reassigned, or removed from the forefront of human evolutionary thought. Cro-Magnon, Peking Man, Java Man, Ramapithecus, all of these were once shouted from the proverbial rooftops in both popular news articles and serious scientific publications as proof of evolution, only to later lose favor among the more progressive evolutionary community. Currently popular candidates such as Homo erectus are not faring much better under scrutiny. Although smaller than the average human is today, the brain size is within the range of modern people, and studies of the middle ear have shown that Homo erectus walk just as we do. There's nothing about their skeletons that fall outside of the normal human range, and their remains have been found in the same strata near ordinary Homo sapiens, clear evidence that they lived together. Given the range of heights, sizes, and features that we see among the fully human race today, they're not exactly anything to write your evolutionary thesis about. However, there's still one very popular contender often discussed, the famous fossil find called Lucy. Australopithecus afarensis, popularly known as Lucy, is still the most well-known modern example of supposed human evolution today. She was once much touted as our supposed ancestor, and uniquely named because of the Beatles song, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. It was playing when she was assembled by the team that found her in Ethiopia. However, her star has faded. For example, one of the main reasons evolutionists suggest that Lucy walked on 2 feet instead of all 4s like the ape she resembles is that she was found near a set of fossilized human-looking footprints in a rock layer that they believed had formed at the time Lucy lived, but dated as older than human existence. They then concluded that these footprints must have come from Lucy's kind, and museum reconstruction gave her human-looking feet. However, they later found such tracks a full 932 miles, nearly 1,500 kilometers, away from Lucy's bones in Tanzania. A far better explanation is that their evolutionary assumptions are just wrong, and that they're simply a set of human footprints that have nothing to do with the cobbled together group of bones called Lucy, that aren't necessarily even collected from the same creature. You see, many laypersons likely imagine that specimens like Lucy were found in a heap and carefully retrieved as a somewhat articulated skeleton that clearly shows these ape-like hominids in similar form to how their reconstructions are shown in books and museum replicas. However, her skeleton is only 40% complete. A 2015 New Scientist article reported, "A careful look at the ancient hominin skeleton suggests that one bone may actually belong to a baboon." Now, statues portraying Lucy in museums to this day display her walking upright with human-like hands and feet. However, when Lucy was found, she didn't have hands, just 3 left hand bones that were incomplete and not human-like, or feet whatsoever. These depictions were assumed based off of the footprints found 1,500 kilometers away, with no other physical evidence whatsoever. And scientists have since found other, more complete skeletons of such Australopithecines, which do include hand and feet bones. And from them, we can make a safe guess that Lucy's hands had long, curved fingers, suited for climbing in trees, and that Lucy's feet had opposable toes seen in the hand-like feet of apes that could easily grab and climb. She didn't have human-like feet. Detailed studies of the inner ears, skulls, and bones suggest that Lucy and her like were not in fact transitioning to human anytime soon. They may have walked more upright than most apes, but not like humans. Once all of the evolutionary ideologies and interpretations are stripped away, Australopithecus afarensis is very similar to a pygmy chimpanzee. A key to understanding all of this can be found in one of the more famous attractions of the Pickard's Museum, Trongate, circa 1908, in the character that was known as Solomon the Man-Monkey. In a reversal of the typical missing link sideshow attractions, Solomon was an actual chimpanzee dressed up in men's Victorian finery and allowed to wander around. People were amused at the absurdity of seeing an ape aping a man, and he too was touted as Darwin's missing link. In essence, these examples demonstrate both ends of the spectrum of man's attempts to provide evidence for human evolution. Naturalists have looked for the most human-looking ape fossils they can find, or conversely, the most ape-like human fossils possible. However, as Kipling said, "Oh, east is east and west is west, and never the twain shall meet." The fact is that Darwin's missing links are still missing because they never existed. Men were specially created in the image of God. Sadly, belief in deceptive evolutionary ideas have led many people to conclude that the God of the Bible doesn't exist, much to the detriment of mankind.
You see these drawings and pictures, the artists are really good about making these drawings, but if you just pick up a bone, a skull, you have no idea how color the skin is, what the hair's on there, what the nose looks like, what the ears look like. All that's just made up by the artist, making it look like that this is our ancestry. You know, and a lot of times the eyes are made white. Well, no apes have white in their eyes like that. It just makes it look. The theory of evolution, probably most of you all know this, but in case you don't, there have been millions of people in the 20th century that were killed because of the theory of evolution. Adolf Hitler basically thought the Aryan race was an advanced race, and that other races were inferior. So the best thing to do is get rid of the weeds in the human body. And so basically we get rid of all these, and he thought he would be held as a hero because he basically killed all these not evolved, not very far evolved human beings. You know, Margaret Sanger, the starting of Planned Parenthood, basically what she was wanting to do was get rid of the black kids because they were weeds in the human body. It's really, that's what she started it that way, thinking, well, we need to get rid of these black children, you know, before they're, you know, boredom before they're born, so that we don't have all these weeds and unfit human beings.
Is your mic on? No. Your mic's
Your
not
mic's
on.
off.
Nobody can hear you. Your mic's on.
Nobody? Oh, okay.
Some of us can. Some of us would appreciate a little more volume too. So.
I'll turn it off. I'm sorry. Okay, testing. Hear me now? Okay, but it's, you know, so sad. You know, Darwin himself, and you never hear the media or anybody quote this, Darwin basically believed that the average white man was here and the average black man was here, and then right in the middle of those two or the black man was between the Caucasian and the orangutan. That's how Darwin thought about black people. And we know that's horrible. That thinking was horrible. This whole idea is horrible, and it's caused some major problems, that just deception. So we need to, the biggest thing is we need to question everything. We need to, don't just believe what you hear, check it out, make sure, it's biblical, it's the truth. And that's hard to do because it takes a lot of work, because we're just hearing so much stuff from so many different ways, and we need to examine. The Bible says examine everything carefully. Don't just hear something and say, well, it must be true because he says it. Some people may just be repeating what they heard, not necessarily, that they did that on purpose, that they wouldn't hurt anybody, but we just need to do that. Well, we got one more week, so thanks for coming out, and hopefully I'll see y'all next Monday start at 7. All right. God bless y'all.